hear of alchemy, do you think of wizardry and voodoo magic? Do you think of potionry and brewing of mass chaos? What happens if I told you that Sir Isaac Newton was an alchemist? Would you believe me? Alchemy was never about magic or potions. It was merely a science. And alchemists got a really bad reputation because they did mess with substances that no one understood and could find potentially dangerous. Now, you may be thinking, what does it matter that old men 2,000 years ago mixing a bunch of things together has any importance today? Alchemy played a big role in creating one of the bigger branches of sciences that we have today, which is chemistry. Now, I'll be starting in the beginning and how alchemy began to arise and their beginning ideas. I'll then be talking about the discoveries they have made, and later on I'll be talking about today's alchemy or chemistry. Now let's go back to when alchemy started. Alchemy started about 2,000 years ago, supposedly in Egypt or China, but did not begin to spread until Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. Then alchemy spread through other civilizations by the form of conquest and influential cultures, which occurred when trade. Now, the overall goal of alchemy was to discover the components of matter and understand the nature of matter. Those alchemists who sought out alchemy to become rich and find gold were normally called puffers or bellow blowers because alchemy was not about getting rich. Now, the main goal and one of the biggest things they tried to do was to create the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was the correct mixture of all components of a metal, which included mercury, sulfur, and salts, in the correct acid that was then instantly poured into a specific glass jar. The timing had to be perfect, and every component had to be in the exact measurement. And they would create what they called the Philosopher's Stone. And even though stone is in its name, it was a powder, not an actual stone. What they believed this powder could do was turn metal into gold. They believed this because they believed the Philosopher's Stone was a superfine form of gold, which to them at the time was the most pure thing in the world. Now, they also believed the Philosopher's Stone could have been used to cure any disease, but then it was normally referenced as the elixir of life rather than the Philosopher's Stone. This was only the beginning of alchemy, but what discoveries had they made? Alchemy played a big role in medical science in the very beginning. With the help of alchemists, they began to use a treatment called using hot baths with cinnabar or mercury to cure certain diseases such as trachoma and venereal disease. Also, alchemy were able to create stillers, which this picture represents of, which helped them in their search for the Philosopher's Stone. They also built furnaces, which were later used in the Industrial Revolution to purify iron, although this is a much more modified version. Mercury played a big role also in medical science. In the beginning, mercury played a big component in one of the very first medical ointment called quicksilver. This was used to cure skin diseases. Now, today we have always been told mercury is a bad substance and to stay away from it. This quicksilver was not just mercury. It was a mixture of mercury and other forms of metal, such as sulfur, bronze, tin, and all sorts of different matters. As well as a disease back then was a meaning of life or death. And if mercury could kill parts of the skin, and specifically the part that was infected with the disease, it boosted your chance of surviving. Now, alchemy played a big role in discoveries. And what may surprise many people is alchemy has never died. Alchemy has merely evolved into what today we call chemistry. In today's chemistry, there are many similarities with alchemy. Alchemy has set the foundation of chemistry. Such examples are of both rely on creating new substances and finding new chemical reactions, and because they're trying to understand the components of matter. They both have been able to help people, but because this is simply the foundation does not make it the same. Many differences that came from alchemy that separates it from chemistry is the fact that chemistry is focused more on all forms of matter, like air, liquid, and solids, whereas alchemists were primarily focused on metals and trying to discover the Philosopher's Stone. Chemists today also feel more of a global need for their discoveries affect everything worldwide, whereas alchemists, the biggest thing they could affect was probably a village or the town they lived in. Now let us review what we have talked about. In the beginning, alchemy was spread through Alexander the Great, and their beginning goal was to search for the Philosopher's Stone, because they believed if they could find it, they could turn all metals into gold, and they could cure any disease. Later on, alchemists found new substances and made new medical advancements, such as the quicksilver, as well as the new devices such as the distiller and the furnace that would later help with the Industrial Revolution. And then it later evolved into what we today call chemistry, because they have the same foundation, but chemistry focused a lot less on metals and more on all parts of matter. Now, the next time you hear alchemy, don't instantly think of those crazy people mixing a bunch of things together. Instead, think of them as the early scientists who also began. Many scientists such as Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton.